not miss today with this good self is I understand that you're a very passionate man when it comes to native birds, and one of the many species that we're very concerned about is the orange-bellied parrot, a unique bird of immense interest, and the one that relied on the lower lakes and the Coorong in the past for food, as well as respite from long flights out of Tasmania. Do you see any future improvements with parrot numbers and feed resources should the system return to being an estuarine feature?
Well, it's very difficult to tell because the parrots are so rare, we don't really know what they need and do. I mean, it's probably right, to be honest, the most recent reports I've had about orange-bellied parrots are grim reading, in the sense that the numbers are declining quite rapidly in their Tasmanian breeding areas, and they're so few now that they barely get out of Victoria, so I don't think there's hardly any records for South Australia in the last few years. It doesn't matter how much food we give them, we're talking about now maybe 100 to 150 birds, despite the fact they release quite a few every year from captive breeding. So something is wrong, and they have been in decline, even though there's been extensive research and intensive work in their breeding areas in southwest Tasmania, which is again relatively untouched. The projections are that maybe in 10 or 20 years' time they will be no more, other than in people's cages. But that's not... I mean, with the work I've been doing with Stephen Garnett and Judith Szabo from Charles Darwin University, where we're reviewing the status of all Australia's birds. In fact, when I was last in Adelaide, we were going through the South Australian birds. I mean, across the entire nation, the story is looking really very grim for bird life. We're talking possibly that 5 different subspecies or species of Australian bird have disappeared in the last 10 to 20 years. So things are certainly not rosy. We're losing basically bird species 1,000 or 2,000 times the natural rate of what we would normally have lost bird species if we weren't covering the planet like a plague. So, and the Mount Lofty Ranges and the southern areas of South Australia are certainly not in a good state. One of the other species that's about to be declared extinct is the Mount Lofty Ranges spotted quail thrush, which is an endemic subspecies that used to live in the Fleurieu Peninsula, in grassy areas under stringy bark, grassy and rocky areas. Nobody's seen one since 1983, and they're just about to write it off.
Sad stories, aren't they?
And the lack of investment by all our governments has been quite disturbing, because the federal government have reduced spending on threatened species. WWF had to cancel their threatened species network because of lack of funds. So it seems as though governments at all levels have reduced investment in conservation over the last 10 years, and now we're paying the price for that reduced conservation effort. So we're just hoping that we can get a government that decides that conservation is worth spending a few pennies on.
Yeah, of course, the whole notion of ecology and ecosystems is that interconnectivity between species right through the spectrum. And I guess as humans, we haven't been very well tuned into the notion that perhaps some of the things we do that affect what's happening out there in the biota might yet just affect us quite significantly too.
Just in winding up, Professor Possingham, I do recall last year we had a group of scientists down in Goolwa for a meeting, and they actually spent a week looking at the system down here. And one night over at a meeting, I was very fortunate, and most of us were, to meet Professor Max Finlayson, who you'd know from being a Ramsar representative, of course. He was an amazing man, and I guess the thing that amazed me more than anything was the fact that he said, we're not so concerned about what sort of wetland it is, as long as it's a good wetland. And, that puts a shining light on what we were attempting to put forward.
I mean, Ramsar sites are invariably are nominated because that they contain a large number of individuals of a handful of species, and or they contain threatened species, and most water birds don't care too much about. I mean, not so fussy about salinity. There's some that only like seawater. There's a few that only like saltwater, freshwater. But then there's a whole host that want both of them, and there's a whole host that aren't too fussed. I mean, you can see a black swan sitting in the sea, and you can see a black swan sitting in a freshwater lake in a pond. So you're right. I think that an estuarine, if the lower lakes were returned to an estuarine system, some of the enormous declines we've seen in the Coorong of migratory waders could well find some refuge in the lower lakes. In the sense, the lower lakes with that very fixed. I mean, these waders, they must have water going up and down with tides, and must be variable to a certain extent. And so they may well come back into the lower lakes if there's some more variability in the height of the water. Yeah, quite right. Look, it's been great to speak with you, Professor Hugh Possingham. We really appreciate your time. I know we've gone overboard, and I just hope you're not banging into a lecture up there for some reason. That's okay. But look, on behalf of our listeners and the people here at 5EFM down at Victor Harbour, please accept our sincere thanks for joining us today on Counterbalance.